Okay, we're back online. So we're going to restart prep at 6. Okay, we stopped prep at 3:35. I will work on sending it out and then give it over. Okay, it's sent. Okay. Everyone should have gotten it. In the meantime, even if you haven't, it's going to be the K and then the incumbency, whatever it's called. The one about sharing. Okay, does everyone have the doc in the order? MSU, yes. Ezra, yes. Maggie, yes. Gabe, yes. Okay, cool. I'm going to start in like 5 seconds, so cut me off if need be. American capitalism fundamentally depends on imperialism to sustain economic growth. American economic and political structures are purposely designed to sustain global inequalities and maintain the global status type for extraction and exploitation. Antitrust reform is the newest project to save capitalism and revitalize the American economy at the expense of the periphery. That cynical and eroding overtraining this arrangement requires a steadfast commitment to prioritizing disposable populations and academic research. Policy research is ideological ammunition for upholding colonial structures, but active critique can flip the script and fuel decolonial struggle. That's Gandhian Foster framework. The app is an object of research. The judge should evaluate the app holistically holistically and determine whether the introduction of AF scholarship into debate was good or bad. The next burden is to prove AF research undesirable, which precedes plan and alt implementation. 1. Reciprocity. The AF gets to weigh the research, justify the plan, and can fiat away political barriers to plan implementation. The next, you get to critique that research and imagine away barriers to alt. 2. Erasure. Academic research determines policy formation and implementation. Colonial erasures in academic debate can and will be used to ignore imperialism when implementing policy and design movements. Implementing good policies for bad reasons means that colonial structures win in the long run. That's Ghani. 3. Silencing debate. Requiring unique links and material alt solvency makes debate a rigged game that intrinsically favors dominant ideology, since investing in a genocidal system is, quote, non-unique, so long as that system is entrenched. Demanding policy relevance is an elite tactic to channel dissent into reformism that strengthens colonial structures. Academic spaces should strive to critique dominant systems and imagine alternatives, even if the status quo seems inevitable. That's Ghani. 4. Solice in terms their offense. A. Clash. Theirs only serves imperialism. B. Predictability. Their K. The K is all based in their 1AC. They just need to defend their own AF. C. Fairness. This isn't you link, you lose. The AF can win that introducing their research is good using their 1AC. Our interpretation shifts the lens from policymaker to academic, which is more realistic. The Paul evidence is wrong. Our Ghani evidence is specific to imperial scholarship and why it is good to root that out, which turns their evidence. We don't, the short-term argument, our alt resists imperialism in the short term, so it solves our impact. I'm going to do the alt debate here. The alternative is a workers' international. This would be led by the Global South, link together Marxist organizations, and place the struggle against imperialism at the center of their agenda. That would materially counter neocolonialism through coordinated labor strikes that disrupt global supply chains, boycotting Western institutions, and tapping into a history of successful decolonial movements. The non-aligned movement, United Debt Resistance, and the People's Agreement of Cochabamba all provide powerful examples of international coordination and challenge capitalist imperialism. Rejecting the AF's research is both necessary and sufficient to solve the alt. 1. Exportability. Voting AF doesn't enact the plan, just like voting neg doesn't enact the alt. Debate should only be a question of whether our research supports or derails the desired choice. 2. Movements. They have sufficient energy and participation now, but they lack a subjective basis. Decolonial academic research is the most effective way to improve movements against imperialism. They say 2 reasons why the alt fails. First, coordinated strike solve. Fox 21 logistics make sure work global capitalism. They can break into logistics industries, keep global circulation, good arm capitalist workers, immense power within integrating circulation. All if they can get organized logistics, become central global capitalism, gives workers in which a sector turns potential leverage over capitalist cast. 2. Movements fail is an elite fallacy. Tavin 21 capitalist global nature means that world's done cost central borders workers share somewhere experiences nation participants going to reach local cost air occupying inside 80 countries more than our movements, referring action our power of Russian Revolution, created shockwaves across the planet, periods of the international revolution seem like a pipe change fires. The SEDCO actively work to reinforce the solution, but history proves that Christ and Nepali broke international resistance. The most important thing that socialists can do is get to organizing for today. If your app avoids elite backlash, then you're not challenging imperialism. That's inevitable, but our alt can counter it. The transition workers argument will be answered alone. The perm is worse than the alt alone. 1. Saving capitalism DA, including the AFSAP's energy for academic and political movements against capitalism made by making the system appear just. Antitrust was designed as a mechanism to save capitalism from social movements, which turns their antitrust good evidence. Henwood 21 behind antitrust, affecting competition is positive. We already have too much competitive individuals, meet solidarity with socialism, only decently socialists working their way in the Democratic Party and business cuts and just moving the population producing antitrust and be campaign to restore the capacity of capitalism, funding, flawless and emblem of commerce and the classic bourgeoisie self-destruction strategy. 2. Misdirection DA. Socialist movements need an explicitly decolonial subjective basis, otherwise they'll fail to challenge the worst mechanisms of imperialism, which means our links on case turn the perm. 3. Capitalist redemption DA. Our links prove that the AF immediately makes the world worse and upholds an unethical system. There's no reason to risk alt failure if including the plan could only be bad. I'm going to do the link debate here. America first link. American antitrust is always coherent through the lens on national economy, drawing batteries around who can benefit from that economy and who must be exploited to make it profitable. The application of our antitrust laws extraterritorially is mirrored by the exclusion of international workers from labor protections. Antitrust cases are always decided and laws always designed with the interests of American consumers, American firms, and American innovation in mind. That's quite an irony. The AF is a neoliberal dream advocated by the Koch brothers that argues that we need to deregulate the economy and get rid of the red tape so we can innovate. Even if they claim to help nurses, that's a conservative tactic being used by the Koch brothers, while their main objective is really to massively inflate the profits of the businesses that donate to their foundation. You should be inherently skeptical of AF evidence saying deregulation is good for the public, because empirics prove that it's always carried out with the interests of corporations in mind. Their first piece of evidence on the third advantage is from a GMU economics professor, which is one of the most conservative economic institutions in the US, and their whole advantage 3 is an attempt to make capitalism is an attempt to reform and make capitalism palatable, which spurs innovation and growth in the global north at the expense of the global south. Economic nationalism outweighs boundary making as the ideological basis for international exploitation. Economic growth, competition, and market trends in the global north would not be possible without 40 million victims of modern slavery, 150 million child laborers, or 700 million workers that make less than $2 a day, alongside the massive plunder of resources and economic value from the global south that locks half the world into underdevelopment and poverty. That's Hickles. Our links materially impact the outcome of the plan and meet their framework. Antitrust cases are decided based on neoliberal expertism, meaning that the abstract justifications will be cited to uphold the fundamentally flawed system of antitrust enforcement. That's Ghani and Rosa. They say mixed economy good, but their reformed capitalism is a Trojan horse for imperialism. Finger 17 political implication on political changes in the courts of the base international labor solidarity, opposition between partners who are sharing exposed in the framework of the system, very medium performance their natural ally support to those cuts and world capital, the fundamental initiative of returning imperialism, anti-imperialism, united in the world. World must confront the first one, sort of social evolution, the privilege north lead to social imperialism would be an appropriation from one side of research associated with the fundamental framework on equalization, natural privilege. In tech, the Henwood evidence turns their next card, the tech worker arguments. We do not let American big tech workers into the movement. Our whole argument is about movements from the global south and why we have to start in the global south to effectively challenge Western imperialism. We didn't highlight that the Amin part of the card that they attempted to recut, and we agree that these workers should only get let in the movement if they were willing to abolish the corporations that they work for, which they would never be willing to do that, which is the whole point of their recut of QUET, which we completely agree with. Paul goes negative to EC Paul 21. While competition now and if economy can never be principle for economy, antitrust already makes decision encourage the power forms that are unaccountable when we constrain. We recenter law within law and economy. A deal of competitive will always invite ad hoc policy building and policy program on top of the campaign because the current perceived locally seen there's no avoiding institutional specificity more values seem to requires blocking a paradigm that can seem inescapable. Now the cap debate, 21st century Western capitalism is uniquely bad. One, unsustainable. Western capitalism material basis of cheap extraction will inevitably run out. Environmental deterioration will destroy sites of production in the global south and raise the artificially achievement prices that capitalist growth relies on. Two, interventions, maintaining global unequal exchange relies on military and economic interventions that force liberalization on the global south. The ensures escalating military interventions that's met political and social instability and turns their civil wars to impact. Three, austerity is the price of exploitation rises. Western countries will be forced into austerity, which devastates millions. That's Hickle. King is a counterplan, not a cap solves card. CC King 21. Three things we must do now. Removing greenhouse gases, taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, no search and effort is freeze the arc of marine cloud. Briny is no cool ocean surfaces. Commercially viable CCS doesn't exist for greeny. 21, the plan is still CCS at 120 PS, so to improve the CCS not the way to extend the possible industry life after 20 years to higher mirror 20 virtual CCS power currently operating globally. They generally capture 1,000 current carbon emissions, so means going up 70-fold. They say studies, but growth in emission or actually capitalist renewables increase emissions, break it all. 19 firms innovate to maximize profit. Tech will be directed towards capitalist innovation with limited benefits. The rise absolute impacts to more production. We research these environmental degradation on change tomorrow. Renewable energy is not the same as fossil fuel. Energy use growth, energy displaced less than 1/4 of fossil fuel expanding. Renewable energy is far from enough to confirm fossil fuel consumption. The alt isn't vague and it's unconditional. LOL. The Smith evidence is wrong. There would not be transition wars. It's a one-line assertion in their evidence, and our international movement would allow countries to cooperate with each other. And the market shaping argument doesn't make sense and was indicted above. Now, the sharing advantage. Quickly, capitalism turns solvency of this advantage. Profit-seeking companies will never share in a meaningful way to break down capitalism. Even if they share the McDonald's ice cream machine, they will never share in a way that can actually topple capitalism and move to the post-capitalism that some of their authors describe. It just fuels a better version of reform capitalism as per 1EC Crossix, which we've indicted on the K. And I am going to take a second of breath. 3:35. Okay, 3:05. And I'm good for Crossix.
You're good for Crossix?
Yeah.
Okay. Does the alternative change Parker immunity?
No.
Does the alternative change licensing policy?
No. It like fundamentally disagrees with the starting point of like US policy. So
would
like,
the alternatives movements call for either of those things?
No, getting rid of Parker immunity is what the Koch brothers are calling.
Well, we don't get rid of Parker immunity, but that's fine. We've dealt with that before. The question I'm asking more so is just like, what does the alt think the solution is to entrenched big data interests, for example, on the incumbents advantage?
Yeah, we think that the solution is not starting with Western political legal reform.
No, not defining yourself negatively. In the affirmative, what does the alt want to do?
I know an important part of our alternative is resisting imperialism, and getting to like the active part of it, it is solidarity with the global South in resisting capitalist imperialism. If you're going to try to say, oh, you're just resisting stuff, that's
what does that resistance look like?
What does that resistance look like? It looks like coordinated international strike.
What does a coordinated international strike look like in the context of incumbent tech interests that are going to do sustaining innovation that our tie field evidence isolates will lock in carbon emissions?
Yes. Okay. That's a good question. It would look like workers at these at these tech, like in, I guess, like where the tech companies are located in the global South, in the supply chains, coordinating a strike together to break down these supply chains that these companies rely on.
Where? So what does it mean to break down a supply chain? So what? A tech company no longer has minerals. How does that solve carbon extraction? How does that create technologies that reduce emissions?
I mean, we disagree. Okay, so we disagree that the starting point of countering global warming should be creating renewable energy in the US, because
now define the alternative in the affirmative. What does the alternative want to do about that?
Yeah, stop Western economic growth.
That is negative. So stopping Western economic growth. Then what would you change about Western economics? Because that's obviously not mutually exclusive with the plan.
Yes, it is. You read an econ impact that said Western economic growth is good. The last card in the 1EC.
That is not.
That's my understanding of it. But regardless, it's mutually exclusive with the 1EC because of all things. So it's not a counter plan. Like,
you also have said that like we need to have, international labor strikes. What happens to high paid workers in tech industries that still have their, like you said, they're not part of the movement. So what happens to this like labor solidarity? How does the movement interpret certain populations being immediately bracketed out for what seems like, an indistinct reason when they're part of labor?
It's not an indistinct reason because workers in the US are within the imperialist country.
So those movements will be international and they will never do anything in the US and they will solve all of the problems with US capitalism.
They do not start with the United States. Like that is what we are fundamentally disagreeing with. But also, yes, it is about like global South countries resisting US imperialism.
You good, Mickey? Is Kansas trying to say something? Are y'all prepping? I'm confused.
Well, I was muted while I was giving the order. So
okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
The doc was just sent. The order is the incumbents advantage. I'm picking up where Michael left off. Solvency, rural health, federalism.
Sorry, you said you're starting on the K where he left, or the incumbents advantage where he left off?
The advantage.
Anybody not ready? Nice. Okay. Incumbents advantage answering the innovation turn. Capitalist innovation is bad. It creates data extraction and the quantification of life that devalues human life in the global south. It also creates new technologies that enable capitalist super colonization and disproportionately benefits the global north. That's the culture evidence. Disruptive digital innovation fails to solve warming, reinforces imperialism, and literally increases extractive violence brand. And 21, Green capitalism is anything but inevitable as a counter resistance from the fossil factions of capital in the U.S. especially. There's a boom in extraction of oil through fracking, tar sand, and deep sea sources. If the EU transition is slowed by the Visegrad group, King capitalism will externalize new socioeconomic costs on the workers in China, Africa, who extract rare earth metals. They're indispensable for green tech on the sugarcane workers of the Brazilian plantation supply. Workers with biofuels offenses to evict because of land grabbing. A Kenyan woman sacrifice food security and unpaid care work. The power relationships will be readjusted. Inequality will increase, reorganized on the basis of military coercion, pursuit of raw materials, diplomacy. Green capitalism matures. The continuation of the imperial mode of living. The solvency flow. Extend 1 to C2. The Parker Court ruled that a state doing something anti-competitively is not a Sherman Act violation. There are 3 cases where parking immunity arises: the state doing something bad, quasi-public anti-competitive agent doing something bad, or purely private groups. The F can only topically touch number 3, but not number 1 and 2, which is what all F evidence is about. They agreed with this on T business. They say the private industries are the biggest issue. Their standard for evidence is not quantitative and says that government entities can engage in the same practices, so the risk of the F starts at 40 or 50%. Standard for 15. It makes little sense to extend to government entities when they engage in the exact same context. To extend 1 to C3, the 11th Amendment blocks the F. It creates state sovereign immunity from suits in federal courts and specifically overrides antitrust considerations. Here's evidence post incidental narrowing Parker, but being overridden by the 11th Amendment, Stanley 18. The 11th Amendment has prevented cases. There are cases which were courts ruled in favor of the defendant based on the 11th Amendment. The action was a Sherman Act violation, but the court, but the defendants were entitled to the 11th Amendment. The 11th Amendment. They read this page in Lapoda card. Their argument is status quo descriptive. They say don't worry about the 11th Amendment because it's small now, given that the overlap A is so big. They don't assume the plan necessarily shrinking state action to reach and increasing the amount that's exclusively the 11th Amendment. Page of Lapoda 19. Re-examined actions subject to both actions that are subject to 11th but not state action. Only the last category that poses a risk that 11th Amendment immunity will subvert antitrust policy. Incidental was about Section 5 of the FCC Act, Cornell 15. Incidental, the FCC issued a complaint claiming the board violated Section 5. That's what their next crane card is about. We read yellow, which means no deterrence. Crane in 16. State action immunity in Section 5 of the FCC Act. Their crane evidence doesn't even talk about the 11th Amendment at all. The FCC doesn't have authority beyond the Sherman Act to campaign Kane's argument is simply that they normatively should. Page of Lapoda. In 19. The FTC does not preempt state law. The commission does not assert any superior authority that would other the Sherman Act for a recent argument that the FTC should have superior authority to see green. The F can't do that. 1, no part of the plan text mandates that the FTC do anything, and you shouldn't reward vague plan cowardice. 2nd, even if it did, that's not typical because it's not a core antitrust law. Fellows in 1993. Core laws that as well established that the U.S. core antitrust statutes of Sherman Clayton Act apply. Secondary, the core antitrust laws as the FTC Act, and B, the FTC can't expand the scope. Coke 95. HTC interpretation cannot expand the scope of the relevant statute. Extend 1 to C number 4. No reduction blocks lawsuits. Any form of state presence is sufficient. L1 and 74. Both Parker and Nor have been used to extended immunity and any form of state presence is specifically gets raised in the context of licensing boards, MERS, and 4. State action to door both after the proliferation of licensing authorities can be better tailored to address this problem. To do so, we must determine the 2 exemptions. It's broader than Parker McCarr in 81. Immunity to door is much broader than state action immunity. It's been granted in the absence of Parker Meyer in 86. Courts have granted door the immunity in the face of determination. The Parker immunity should be denied and included, and also the good faith doctrine also blocks the boards. We claim that anti-competitive behavior was motivated by medical concerns. Or said in 78, the final defense and most effective is good faith physicians' assertion of good faith defense. The question is whether defendants were motivated by concern over medical standards. And extend 1 to C5, the cases will be dismissed before a rule of reason test can be applied. Concerted action, market power, standing, causation, in fact, antitrust injury, or any other basic hurdle dismisses the majority of antitrust cases in early litigation, and it's not even close. That's 97% of cases. Con 19. An empirical study of cases found the courts dispose of 97% at the first stage. Courts balance, and only 2% of cases the rural health advantage. Extending the food turn, the F advances a for-profit agro-industrial complex that upholds capital super exploitation on a global scale. First, increasing U.S. food production is bad. Outputs have been dumped by the third world in a manner that crushes indigenous production and creates vicious cycles of dependency on the global north. Second, it's industrial agriculture is environmentally exploitative, which turns sustainability warrants, groundwater contamination from pesticide and fertilizer runoff, raising food overproduction, and more. Third is it creates a cover for liberal interventionism and it makes environmental collapse inevitable. Kumari. And 12, the evidence provided to the collection of historical events shows to support the complex scarcity storyline. Refine the realist assumption that eventually humans will resort to balance. Research shows that an abundance of resources which drives competition, territorial conquest to obtain resources will be expensive. They are pictured as threats to state security that can exacerbate tensions as they use minority groups as scapegoats for environmental degradation. Only those involved in conflict are relevant to environmental security, and those who are vulnerable agency creating the environmental problems that raise this leads to the adoption of their policies, securitizing the environmental laws of the North, meant to justify intervening for the developing nations follow policies which encapsulate the North's norms. Concept of security is used to mobilize any action dealing with the root cause of environmental degradation. That turns the case. Food security is impossible beneath the capital system that privileges the interests of the global North. The unequal exports means that the global South will always be conflict prone. The twisty evidence comes from the center of the American experiment, a think tank that advocates for right-wing conservative principles, and the most comprehensive statistic that they have that says that capitalism is good for food security is that there are more trees now, which is nothing. Only the all solves food production. Actually, in 21, agriculture must be at the center of popular planning to break with the new colonial commodity chains. Farms should stop producing as much as possible, especially in the northern capital states. Covered agribusiness should be dispensed through naturalization. Land should be redistributed to communities rather than farms should be in the control of water, seed, and land. Putting agriculture in the center of planning that recognize the capitalists have over-industrialized the planet. I'm answering their impact evidence. Their representations of conflict are bad. Their DeCampo evidence is warrant for instability is migration, induced conflicts, fear, migration, and driven instabilities, racist trope use to justify colonial control of the global South. Rodriguez and 18. Authoritarian populism identified black men as migrants as strategy to establish consensus for the conservative government. This was achieved by mobilizing racism. In the case of the production of the refugee crisis, we have a similar effective politics rhetoric. Resurfaces within a specific conjecture of racism in Europe. Within this conjecture, the racialized other or reactivated rapidly racist vocabulary, jargon, and imaginary combined with new forms of governing the racialized other through migration control. The second, their Tracy Ramberg evidence comes from foreign policy analysts in the Bush administration, and their own evidence is blasting jihadist terrorism, which itself relies on barbaric assumptions of non-Westerners, which is an independent reason to reject both of their pieces of evidence. The federalism advantage. I don't need to answer the advantage because the impact is silly. Just because people are factionalists doesn't mean they'll take up arms against each other. They've dropped our 1 and C warrants. No civil war versus the military. The U.S. has a fleet of armed drones, over 1 million active troops, and united law enforcement system that deter and wipe out domestic insurgency and maintain stability. Second is wealth analysis of over 172 countries prove it pacifies. If it's saying you should prefer our large and quantitative studies is for the Hanania evidence.
Okie dokie. We have 725. We're going to use them. 145. Yes.
All right, everybody. Are you good for an order? It'll be the incumbents advantage, the rural health advantage, the federalism advantage, the solvency page, the critique. Anybody need the order again? Waiting for the document. Looks like we're missing a judge. Ezra? Maybe? Maybe. Oh, there we go. Okay. You need the order, or I don't know. You might have been listening, we just couldn't see it. Oh. And everybody else is ready, right? It's just Ezra we're having some difficulties with.
I want to take some prep. Can you pause? I want to prep.
Sorry, I'm having some audio issues. Give me a second.
Okay, we're gonna prep for 1 second really quick anyway. So 145.
Yeah, 40. That was 1 second, 5 seconds.
All right, now I'm good.
Okay. And got the order and everything. Yes. Okay, perfect. Unless something objects, I'll start in like 5 seconds. Fantastic. Incumbents outweigh. There's a host of existential impacts, including climate, nuclear escalation, and different scenarios for conflict. They have no terminal defense, but it's just a question of whether or not capitalism can be used to bring down itself. The first argument was capitalism, so something low. This is an argument. We're not negotiating with Facebook, but to the degree this argument is true, would link to the alternative. Instead, the plan is the only thing that's able to resolve these kind of profit motives because it has to do with disruptive tech. Those are different actors because they're not in the markets, which means we overcome the power of incumbents, which is anti-capitalist. The plan is active against corporations. The alt is agnostic at best. Next, extend the type code card is uniquely turned to their capitalism innovation stuff because it indicates that capitalism innovation right now will entrench kind of structural unsustainability claims, but it's also the only ability to counter against it. The brand card, it doesn't contextualize. Subpoint A is digital tech, subpoint B is disruptive innovation and disruptive tech. Our card speaks to the nuances there. Their card is just about innovation in general. It doesn't supply independently. They all can't solve it because it can't change company practices, and they conceded the shore and right evidence. They result in a kind of share washing, which restructures all of their link claims and causes them to inevitably replicate capitalism, whereas we have a clear offense for a model, the rural health advantage. Rural health causes collapse and escalation. Our Brinkman evidence proves epistemological strength. All of their critiques are out of context. Justing interventionism is definitely bad, but that's not our argument. They have causality backwards, and the alt is reverse causal. Our argument is that in the past and empirically proven, there are definitely kind of migration scenarios and escalation from collapse. This isn't a trope. Ukraine proves that there, yes, is kind of a migration spillover that can cause collapse. Now, the more stuff in particular, this isn't a question of shocks. Subpoint A is to the degree it is, it's unethical to ignore food shocks, and subpoint B is the plan isn't kind of an investment in industrial agriculture, but it's instead just a acknowledge of the danger that food shocks can pose. Now, it's not the U.S. is constrained from endless temptation. Our reps are justified. Brooks into possessing military capacity spent to the temperature to the argument of close down Iraq and the 3% Iraq is the ally of the U.S. never took the operation to the Cold War and enriched African much evidence to put their pessimistic extend the and Rob card. We have both justification for our reps and a kind of sustainability card in the context of agriculture, which you should prefer when they are just treating generic evidence. Lastly, we're not exclusive with nationalism. The term like solves the nationalized thing. Federalism advantage, conceded, not going for it, but extend BOCAM, military and money, which is their two defensive warrants, don't apply to the alternative, which means there's a civil war in that transition and we have clear offense, solvency. Squirrel definitely doesn't solve. Subpoint A is they conceded the plan targets conduct or targets practices and conduct, which is able to resolve. Fiat solves a lot of their other deficits, especially the 11th Amendment stuff. That's just part of it. The inherency stuff is, or their Copal card and Crane kind of just prove inherency for us because they indicate there's different levels of enforcement. Now we're able to resolve those things. The FTC evidence is particular in that context. Page in the Reddit proved that independently the 11th Amendment won't get applied. Also, they just dropped the singling part of the absolvency. That creates a deterrence effect. The T stuff we need. Scope, Crane 19. One, rough increase in the scope of federal state and local regulation is given to power nation and better regulations. And we made the core laws, Crane 16, the best of reading section part of the FTC to do this for state of regulation, do restriction, state of sharp the scope of Sherman. Also, core laws obviously include the FTCA. Lastly, like evidence stuff doesn't assume our kind of singling fact or in context. Our evidence is specific to the ways the app solves, which means it avoids their deficits. They proceed. Starting on framework, the plan is the balance about the plan's desirability. Their framework is self-serving, which structurally favors the neg voter for fairness. Subpoint A is clash what we learned from second level testing of predictable claims, break down biases and learning tactics for change, focusing on the contingent question of the resolution is key to unpack neoliberal motivations there. Framework is reductionist. That's the Watt evidence. It turns their standard, assumes their model as well. The scholarship competing on advantage proves the epistemological justification of the plan. So we can access their offense, but they can't access ours. Now their standard first reciprocity. You can just get imagine way potential disadvantages. The alternative. That's obviously unfair and least our fairness offense. It's also not reciprocal because of different standards. The erasure stuff. There's no erasure. Licensing boards push away now, which means we can turn it, and these standards assume no clash, and the purpose of the resolution is fixed. Our model includes both sides, which means there's less silencing because we read education, and our evidence depends the use of it. Now they can't solve any of our standards. That was explained above. They're not predictable and just justify kind of horrible fiat interpretations. That's obviously bad. The permutation, I'm going to extend two of them. First is prone to the plan and non-competitive parts of the alt. Mixed economy, solve market theory for winning offense in the air with a plan. Radical reform combined with antitrust is best and mobilizes coalitions. That's Mazzucato and Burke. It answers their kind of saving capitalism DA because it's descriptive of the way that antitrust goes against those notions. The misdirection and redemption evidence are also answered in that context and by the Mazzucato. Here's more. The term checks. Oh, it's like I'm not going to read that card. Second term I'm going to extend is the same term but outside of the union stuff. You can't get out of just not letting including global south in your movement. That doesn't answer argument. Your evidence is explicit. You would invite in tech workers. That obviously causes your movement to be co-opted. The pick out of it definitely solves our crime evidence is super explicit and better in this context. You can't just get out of an explanation when we have carded analysis and your cards are the ones making the argument. Now the link. No link. We agree competition is furious flawed regulation evasion. How we ran capitalism. They have no link evidence. The plan causes what their impacts talk about. That's Mazzucato. I'll go through each of them. First is America First. It's a link of omission. We're definitely not extraterritorial. Second, the Koch brother jokes on you. The opposite of a Koch utopia. Regulators are liable in the world of the plan, which means it's a Koch nightmare because they're subject. The things that are preventing incumbents from coming in now are the things that would be allowable post plan short. Like upsets the Koch brothers because now there are new competitors to disrupt them. The GMU professor stuff, the indicts are out of context and not responding to our evidence. They have to contextualize it. The 2 hour is too late to do so. Do you want me to read this Stiglitz card? No need. Okay. The sustainability debate. Innovation key to sustainability. Next 5 years key to unlocking African removal, reducing and shift to circular economies that break feedback loops. They dropped the manipulation only for centuries can't solve in time. Air out. We set the IPC global standard for climate data. That's king. They also dropped the shoot. What was that other question?
Just go to the alt.
Go to the alt. You sure?
Yeah.
Okay. Alt fails. 1, it can't solve the case. Policy intervention in markets is key to both advantages. What they can do resolve our internal link. Second is transition war. The Smith card is comparatively better. They didn't really answer it. It causes war and escalation as displayed by the bootcamp camp. Now, the 2 things they say are strikes and boycotts. Subpoint A is these are definitely not exclusive, so the perm solves them. Second, these movements and fail empirically. That's the cross application of the Manson evidence to reject the AF arguments. Burke and Mason answer the movements empirically fail outside of the context of things like antitrust. It's not a link. They're citing this random Australian hack that doesn't contextualize. We have both better sustainability warrants and contextualize in the movement better, which is the incumbent's advantage.
Okay, 305 starting in a sec. Okay, starting now. Okay, that was private. Okay. Everyone's here, right? Cool. So the order is going to be solvency, then incumbency, then rural health, and then the K. A little bit of a weird order, but it will make sense.
You want me to send it or you
Yeah, Mickey's sending out a quick card that I may read at the bottom. And when he does that, I'm gonna I need to split screen the Zoom with a timer. One sec. Okay. And Mickey should have sent that card. I'll wait for everyone to pull it up, but it won't be right till the end anyway. Okay. Is everybody good? Maggie, Gabe, y'all are good? Okay, cool. Solvency, incumbency, rural health, K. Awesome, okay. Debating a K doesn't mean you just get to start dropping solvency arguments. They've dropped two arguments for why the affirmative cannot solve. First, other exemptions will be cited by judges that will cause their cases to be dismissed, even though the AF gets rid of Parker immunity as a defense for these private industries. They can still utilize other exemptions in antitrust laws to prevent them from being sued. Specifically, Nora Pennington will be used. We have comparative evidence that compares Nora Pennington and Parker and says that Nora Pennington is applied more broadly. It is applied in the absence of Parker immunity, and it is specifically applied in licensing cases, which is what the affirmative is about. Our Hunt evidence also says that Nora Pennington is the most widely cited exemption in the context of the app, which means that even if the app gets rid of Parker, it doesn't get rid of Nora, which will block their cases. Second, 97% of antitrust cases are blocked for reasons that the app can't solve. Other legal reasons like barriers to litigation, a lack of standing, and a lack of jurisdiction means that 97% of cases are blocked, and antitrust is an ineffective tool. Both of these arguments are dropped, and none of the 1AR arguments about the 11th Amendment or the FTC respond to them. It has two implications. First, presumption. They've dropped two arguments for the app straight up can't solve, and they haven't explained anything through the 1AR. Don't allow the 2AR to reinvent the wheel, and you should be willing to vote negative on presumption if they aren't a meaningful change from the status quo to solve their advantages. Second, it bolsters the critique because it proves that the app is not a broad reform against capitalism because it barely does anything to affect the world. Incumbency. The app may claim to be a new form of capitalism. It is certainly not anti-imperialist. We have two link arguments on this advantage for why they make capitalism more imperialist and more extractive in the short term. First, an increase in capitalist digital innovation is bad. Western innovation will not benefit the global South, but their data will be extracted. New forms of data colonialism will be tested on, and new forms of data colonialism will be tested on them. Second, specifically true in the context of the green tech that they say that they're going to solve. Our brand's evidence says that a transition to a green capitalism via high economic growth, but a transition to renewable energy just means more extraction from the global South. It just means net more extraction from the global South and exploitation of labor in the global South, that they linearly increase imperialism by increasing green innovation without a stop to economic growth. The brand evidence is fantastic. They have no clear impact aside from warming, which they've dropped two turns to on the K. First, the pre evidence says that capitalist renewables increase emissions because they just net increase production, and the Jevons paradox means that net increased economic growth will always outstrip efficiency gains. Also, nothing about renewables inherently displaces fossil fuels, which are the root cause of warming. Fossil fuels will continue to exist alongside renewables and not solve warming. Also, CCS doesn't exist, which most capitalist mitigation strategies rely on, which Russo ultimately fails per the Maggie evidence. Rural health. Food insecurity is inevitable in a world of capitalism. Capitalism will only give food to people who can pay for it, which causes massive distribution problems because billions of people live on less than $2 a day and can't afford the food. They have massive dependence on U.S. agriculture, which doesn't give a crap about distribution of this food or food security in other countries. Only, which is the AGI evidence. Only the alternative is able to solve this, which is the dropped AGI card. They also externally lead to intervention, which is a DA to the perm and inclusion of the AF because representations of migration and jihadism as reasons why food-induced wars will escalate, encourages liberal interventionism by the United States, and is just a straight-up colonial trope that you should reject as per our framework argument. The Brooks evidence is obviously nonsense. He's advocating for more U.S. intervention, and the fact that the U.S. intervened in Afghanistan and is selling weapons in Yemen prove that they haven't lost their appetite. Okay. The top level framing is that basically the AF argument boils down to, yes, we are imperialists, but your alternative cannot solve it, and it is inevitable. This is the cult of inevitability, which attempts to argue that because these things are inevitable, we shouldn't attempt to challenge them. You should be willing to take a leap of faith and challenge imperialist structures, even if they seem inevitable and seem extremely hard to counter, because they have functionally conceded that the AF contributes to these fundamentally unethical imperialist structures, and your role as a judge within debate is to use your position within academia to attempt to counter these colonial research practices. Voting AF or neg does not implement the plan or the all, but you can root out colonial scholarship within debate, which should be your a priority objective as the judge of this debate. Now, the framework debate, the AF should be viewed as an object of research. The debate should be about whether the introduction of AF scholarship is good. They've conceded that's fair because they just need to weigh why their scholarship is not good, and it is good to give the negative links to representations. Otherwise, they're allowed to say colonial stuff and win debates, and our links will always be viewed as non-unique. We turn their clash arguments because we allow for more anti-imperial clash, which is the biggest impact in debate. Now, winning this framework, which is simply a middle ground, just means that you should not give them the perm double bind as long as we have good representational links to their plan. And even if they are winning cuts against our alternative solvency, you should still vote neg to reject the inherently unethical colonial scholarship of the 1AC. Now, the perm debate proper, mixed economies are bad. Our finger evidence says that mixed economies are just an attempt to satiate capitalism in the West, which will always harm the global South because it maintains economic growth and extractive practices as per our finger evidence, and all of our link arguments. We're far ahead on the wing debate. The AF coheres their antitrust through benefiting American innovation and improving American capitalism through the sharing economy, which never benefits the global South. That maintains an economy where the global South is maintained as a site for labor exploitation and resource extraction, which has kept hundreds of millions of people in poverty, which is a far bigger impact than in the case. The King evidence was indicted because it is talking about stuff that isn't happening in the status quo. Now, the alternative award, there's only a risk that a Workers International could challenge capitalist exploitation because it is the colonized people rising up against the capitalist overlords that are attempting to impose imperialism on them. They dropped material examples of how this has worked in the past, and even if it doesn't solve, your role as an academic is to reject their colonial scholarship. Debate cannot actually implement the alternative, which is our framework and framing arguments.
We have 140.
Okay. So that's time. The order will be the incumbent's advantage, then the federalism advantage, then the rural health advantage, then solvency, and then the critique. Okay. Is anyone not ready? Cool. Don't miss the forest for the trees. The app has the strongest internal link to resisting capitalist exploitation. Only investing in the sharing economy and digital tech innovation in a disruptive sense is able to be able to create sustainable technological innovation. Insofar as the alternative wants to be able to create that change, you need to punish them for lack of a mechanism to be able to do that. Our tie field evidence is the best card in this round. It says that the affirmative is the only way to grapple with inevitable digitization of various industries in the way, i.e. we have a literal argument for why digital colonialism is inevitable in the context of the app. Unless if the app happens, we have a unique link turn to the way that it functions, i.e. testing and green tech's failures are indicative of sustaining innovation, which our tie field evidence distinguishes as part of a complex system of features that are failing when incumbent interests are allowed to block people from the market, only opening those up as per the Olhausen evidence. Straight link turns their ability to say that technological innovation facilitates digital colonialism. The external impact is locking in carbon extinction. Tie field and our short evidence are really good that capitalist exploitation requires communalism in some form, but the way that that manifests absent the app, it results in failed innovations that lock in carbon extinction because the economy is big, but the alternative has no way to be able to create persuasive mechanisms that actually break those things down. The impact will be our Mason evidence, which says that articulating those structures is really important, i.e. the chance that the affirmative creates a form of the sharing economy that does solve is way, way higher when you can articulate something close to a vision and advocate something like the permutation. Instead, the alternative's choice to advocate a vague vision and just say, well, fuck it, it gets close enough, we'll just impact turn and go for framework, literally should be punished in a representational sense as being a bad resistance strategy to capitalism. Our Mason evidence says it empirically fails, generates, is not salient among labor solidarity, and it literally is just an instrumental use of the global South and some sort of movements that will do random labor strikes and solve the types of exploitation. It's an ivory tower tactic. It's ineffective academically, and you should punish it. The reason why warming turns things, none of it assumes our internal link, i.e. Jevons paradox is indicative of growth models that when the app navigates that same complexity, that's tie field, the displacement, fossil fuels, and CCS arguments rely on King. We're using the tie field evidence combined with the Bozanov evidence that was dropped, which says that even oil-rich countries that have high amounts of consumption can transition to meet IPCC carbon goals, which is sufficient to solve the case. Yeah, federalism. Can you give me your timer? Mine's wrong. Thank you. Okay. Drop the federalism. Disadded the alt. Beaucamp says that civil wars occur in instances of instability insofar as we win the Mason evidence that those representations cause austerity politics and encourages nuclear lash out. Prefer our Smith evidence. The alt causes external instability and undermines conflict. Both one and our answers are not accessed by the alt. Proves they can't get out of it. The transition defense that the transitions defense that they attempted to read is bullshit. They don't get it, but it's even in the 2AC. Rural health. Food shocks go nuclear and spark civil conflict that escalates. That's Ramberg. We have epistemological justifications. Brakeman's the best card, which qualitatively and quantitatively uses robust elliptical studies and empirical techniques that connect it to civil conflict. They've dropped a raw evidence, which says that our representations are important, and deploying them to be able to at least highlight where disparities exist is important. All can't solve. They drop the or evidence. Capitalism key to their impact turn of ag, which this says are becoming more sustainable. They've also dropped the by nature long-term. Food shocks happen in the short term, which means the app's key to it. There's no interventions. It's a colonial trope. All of their critiques are in the context to have causality backwards. They came up with Afghanistan shit. We already pulled out. There's no reason why it occurs monolithically. They have not applied it to our internal link scenarios, and it's just asserted that would be the case. Solvency. Three top-level arguments. One, durable fiat checks. We cite the practices that are targeted, not the doctrine that protects it. Second is that Parker is key. Our Olhausen and Kohler evidence say it's enough to be able to that those immunities are enough to solve our advantages. Third is we've dropped the Crane evidence, which says that the affirmative signal is sufficient to be able to generate deterrence. The line by line other exemptions. One, we target practices, not doctrine, which means that insofar as those are exempted, they would still be covered by the affirmative's expansion because the topic says by at least. They have no evidence that it takes out the advantage, just that it implicates certain cases. Second is barriers like standing are completely solved by signal. A big case is enough, and we fiat the resources to do so. The presumption and boost K arguments only assume that they have evidence that gets to the level of taking out the advantages. Cap. All of the stuff they did at the top about inevitability being a bad frame, you should flip to the calculus for that, because the alternative has no articulation for how they can escape the inevitable pressures of the transition to do things like austerity, conflict, and failure to distribute resources, and the inevitable digitization that occurs after that framework. Advantages are always in defense of our scholarship, and clash is the only internal link to be able to understand anti-imperial logistics. Letting us defend our advantages is necessary for that. You can win reps, cause certain impacts, and we agree with you that you should be able to get uniqueness for them based on the alt, but insofar as you don't have mechanisms as to why you can reverse causally address those, you should be punished for that. Only our framework maximizes that. Our Watts evidence says it maximizes contingency to be able to resist neoliberal subjectivities. The vagueness that they advocate for is a failure of ivory tower politics that never generates labor solidarity. Pern do the plan, and non-competitive parts of the alt that don't include high-tech workers. Their alternative evidence says it would invite them into the fold, and they only just said they have to the perm is labor solidarity, which means that the perm at least has net offense that massively outweighs because tech workers undermine the alt. And our Burke evidence says that, and Paul evidence, our drop says the anti-monopoly tradition is mobilizing. It's not a monolith, which means the affirmative as a method of energizing those movements abroad does not trade off with them at all. Given that, you should be completely convinced that the non-competitive parts of the alt can do labor strikes and other ways to resist capitalism, and that there's no way that we change those things. Increasing growth, they don't have any evidence that trades off with those labor movements, which means that the alternative solves the links as well. But insofar as we help growth, quote unquote, it's a trope where Paul evidence says it's a bad frame and that it doesn't solve, i.e. the affirmative has an internal link to the way that we affect growth. The sharing economy means that growth is redistributive in nature, and our Mason evidence says that only articulating that frame is being able to generate an impetus to move outside of capitalism. The alternative says only a risk we change. Examples prove, but they have not articulated that to the way that Parker functions. We have unique evidence about the way that capitalism functions in the context of the sharing economy, in the context of food shortages, etc. And unless and until the negative can articulate why tech workers wouldn't co-opt the alt, why strikes are able to generate decarbonizing technology, why strikes can navigate the digital era. The closest thing they've got was the 2NC Crossix warrant about disrupting critical supplies. But what does that look like in terms of capitalism? It undermines the ability to innovate, which just demonstrates our Mason evidence and Smith evidence that the alternative turns to austerity when faced with a problem that requires mass mobilization, which means that we are in too deep, and you should only vote for innovation-based advantages because they're the only ones with uniqueness.
Good debate.
Great debate, MSU.
Great debate.
We're working on a card doc.
Same.
Neg card doc is sent.
AFS is sent as well.
That was a false alarm. Sorry.
No worries.
No, so they have these like silly cards that are like actually really specific to the app, really.
Huh.
But
Okay, now you're unmuted though.
Hi, 3-minute warning.
Okay, everyone is in. Okay, great debate, everyone. The decision was a 2-1 for the negative. I sat. The short of it is I didn't vote on solvency presumption and that I thought MSU won the affirmative risk of linked turns and sustainable technology on the CAPK. I started on solvency, and I don't think that you get to presumption for a couple of reasons. The top level, like kind of framing for stuff, is I do wish there was a card from Kansas that said to resolve anti-competitive conduct by state licensing boards, one would have to remove immunities offered by both Knorr and Parker. I have a hard time kind of like stringing together all these like one-line cards from individual like cases to get to like advantages 0. And I just don't think we get there. So frame for presumption is I kind of agree with 2AR. It's like we gotta get to like zeroing the affirmative in order for you to get there. But I don't think that we're zeroing it because of a couple things. One is deterrence. I think the FTC card is like okay, and you gave up on FTC is not a core law, and they read a card that it says like states would at least have to change their behavior, and they would potentially have to change their decision making. So I do think they have like maybe we deter stuff. 2 is the card that Parker is most important is okay. I thought about your answer that like we have a card that says Knorr is bigger in comparative, and I don't think it says that. If you have a card that says that the scope of immunity under Knorr is bigger because Knorr covers any government petitioning, which is just like literally more conduct. But I don't think you have a card that's like Knorr is cited more often, it applies more often. It's like going to be like default switched to if we were to close the state immunity. Then I've thought about this like Meyer 86 card. I think it says some courts have found Knorr applied after they found that Parker did not apply, which is helpful, but I'm not sure that it's like super broadly applicable to the landscape that we're dealing with post-AF, or that it means like 0 solvency because it will just apply in every instance, or even most instances, to be honest. Like I just really wasn't sure what the context for those suits were, and I wish you had kind of contextualized and explained why those were likely to be applicable post the plan. And then I thought like good faith in medical boards could have been useful, but wasn't really extended. So I didn't really give much weight to those cards in the doc. And then 97% of cases are blocked for reasons the AF can't solve with, I think is solved to some degree by like we target the practices argument, which I don't think the 2 in our answers. That's like we do prohibit the practice. And like the buy at least thing I think is tacky, but like it is said. And then the second thing was just like maybe durable fiat, they solve some of the like resources that would help those cases. I try not to think about this, but like that card does not say 97% of antitrust suits are denied. It says 97% of like sensitive data claim cases get dismissed, which is not really relevant to the AF, but like I tried not to think about it that much. I do think they have like 2 other answers though. So I just don't think you got to like 0's presumption. And I do kind of buy maybe it could implicate solvency for link cards and stuff, but I don't really get to like no case. The CAPK. I think that you have a lot of things going on. You kind of have like a cap K and you've got an imperialism K and you've got some framework and alternative arguments for both, but like not enough by the end. Alternative solvency, which is usually important for me. I'm going to talk about that then framework. I did not think that you were winning very much. I think that your cards were better than the 2 in our explanation for alt solvency, but the like worker movement just rejects all the people who disagree with it, like tech people. Does not really jive well with the Civil War thing that happened on the case. I didn't have an answer to the Civil War thing, and I did have like the Civil War thing applies to the alternative. It's like a D tier thing. Not sure how you solve it. And like, as you were making the defensive arguments to Civil War, I also thought that was weird. You were like, US military, hell OP. We have just like drones and tanks and shit that'll just body anyone. I was like, they also maybe body like the worker movement. And so I just didn't have an answer to that. I'm not sure like in truth that I think that gets all the way like Civil War and nuclear conflict, like MSU explains, but I don't have you going to the page or explaining why it does not. So first thing was just like some DA that's just like you cause conflict and opposition. You didn't get to read that 2 in our card about transition war, and the 2AC also has a card that just is like you caused a transition war. The Koch brothers, tech people, like most of the Western world probably backlashes to the alt, and I'm not sure how you solve it. The closest you get is like worker strikes and supply chain disruptions. But I think you need to like overwhelmingly win. That quickly brings capitalism to its knees. It would overcome opposition. We would not be able to sustain a conflict or war against the workers movement. And I didn't get to like worker supply chain disruption thing, just like auto ends capitalism and solves opposition. So I'm not really sure how you solve a lot of like the K impacts. I did have the concession of the health advantage, kind of like using your defense. And I think I said that already, sorry. Next thing after I thought about alt was just like framework, what should I do with it? Framework, as explained, it was not super useful for you. I think that you need more instruction on how I should evaluate the AF as an object of research. So you've made a claim that the AF is an object of research. Like I agree, they did research, they presented shit in the one I see. I think you need some more instruction on how should I go about evaluating whether or not it was a good one, because as it stands, your explanation kind of stops at just like, well, colonialism is bad. And so like, if their shit is colonialism, then it's a bad object of research, but also they get to weigh the plan. So we're not you link, you lose. And I think I have a hard time reconciling some of that. And if you had cleaned up your framework interp and had just like a more, it's good to just reject their shit outright. They don't get to weigh anything if we win that. I think I would have jived better with the links that I thought you were winning, which I'll talk about later. But as it stood, I thought that the like, just reject their thing if we win, that some of it is bad, which is like the last pitch you kind of make on framework in the 2NR is in tension with like, they get to weigh their stuff and they get to talk about the reasons that the plan could be good, and that's reciprocal and fair. And so if I'm voting negative to just like reject anti-colonialism and the threshold is like, I saw a little bit of colonialism, so I rejected the plan, it doesn't really seem like I'm weighing the plan or kind of in doing any of the stuff you told me I was supposed to do in the 2NC. And I'm much closer to the explanation that's like, framework is a defense of our scholarship. I don't think, epistemology and like the 1AC cards and everything is a defense of the 1AC. I think the 2AR maybe used that phrase for the first time, but I do think it's close enough to their interpret that is given throughout the rest of the debate. That's just like, if we win that the plan is desirable, then evaluating the advantage and the scholarship behind all of the cards is necessary to determine whether or not the plan is desirable. So I didn't think you could just win by like, we won something you do is colonialism. Sustainability, I think that too late is good and frames a lot of the debate for me. So the threshold for like all of the climate stuff seems like we got to reverse climate damage. We need to repair climate. And I think Jevons paradox and CCS.viable are helpful, but they don't do enough given like the controlling frame that climate change is inevitable and it is bad and it will cause extinction absent repairing the climate. You do make me doubt, like, will we be able to repair the climate? But I don't think you have an answer that's just like collapse is better. This is more likely to be a survivable world that we can live through than voting affirmative. And I think that if you had something that's like closer to DDEV style things that were just like, it would literally be better to collapse than to continue to try, or you just had a card that was like, this IPCC report they're citing is wrong, then that would help. But I just didn't think there was very much sustainability in the 2NR, and you should have extended some of the better sustainability warrants from the 2NC, like just like growth will inevitably collapse from ecological inputs that we run out of. Stuff like that, I just didn't think was in the 2NR. Renewables and exploitation of the global south to facilitate the like trying to do technology stuff, I struggled with, because like I do think you win some risk that it's bad for the global south, but I'm not sure exactly what to do with that given how I thought about framework. And so like, yeah, I do think that there's some risk, but I also thought they have like a link turn to cap that's a little bit more than just like, we tried tech. I thought that the sharing economy stuff had some stuff that's like, we will literally change how we think about labor relationships. We do have a way to try to move beyond the current relationship that exists between global north and global south. Maybe it takes a long time, but like it is seemingly the only way to solve warming. Link-wise, like I don't think food reps are like enough to reject the AF. I do think you're doing a fine job of like food reps are bad and maybe that makes nuke war inevitable, but that's not really impacted out. You're not explaining it as like, this makes nuke war inevitable so you don't solve anything. It was more explained as like, this proves you did colonialism. And I don't think that was sufficient to win the debate. I don't, antitrust was bad stuff. I didn't think was like enough that made me think that the plan was bad or that like capitalism and climate change shouldn't be the primary consideration. And I kind of didn't know what to do with the link beyond like, yes, they maybe lead to things that aren't the best for the global south. The last thing was the permutation. I didn't think you answered the second perm. Like the only thing I had was mixed economies are bad. That might be true, but to me, it was kind of unclear how the alternative avoids a mixed economy and like whether or not it's able to just get rid of backlash. And then like the last things that were said in the 1AR about this perm were just like, you do have to defend the card you read. You read a card that says you invite union people. We do the thing that's like obviously probably illegitimate for theory reasons, but was not said. And so I was like, even if they don't win sharing economy and the alt is shit, like there is just a perm that I don't think is answered. So I just wasn't really sure how to get to the neg ballot. Maybe if you won framework, I would have been like, AF is bad because colonialism, that's auto, but I just didn't get there.
Cool. I'm happy to go, and I apologize if there's some background noise. I got locked out of one of the holding pens, so I'm just in the main the main room. So I agree with Gabe that there was a lot going on. I think both the 2AR and 2NR needed to do a better job of like just telling us what the heck to do with all of it. The way I started, I think the AF invests in a system of imperialist capital. I think that type of exploitation outweighs the chance we have at a genuinely transformative sharing economy revolution, whatever it is that looks like. For me, framework was quite important. The upshot of it was that if I view the AF as a research object, you get the fiated result in order to support its desirability, but alt solvency is not determinative in the other direction. I think the 2NC is like quite clear about this, and I think the 2NR gets there as well. And so what that does for me is it's not just like a total if you're colonialist you lose situation, but they are giving you like a pretty significant AF ground concession in order really, I think, to get out of DAs to the alternative and to get out of a situation in which the alternative matters. And the 2NC, I think, is quite clear that, and this is explained some more in cross-ex, that kind of like taking that initial step to name pieces of bad scholarship and reject it is ultimately something that's more meaningful, or that something that's more meaningful that we as judges can do in this debate. And that to me was convincing enough. You still get to weigh the AF and stuff. They still get to weigh the impacts of their links and stuff like that. But it just kind of like does away with a lot of the alt solvency and DAs to the alt. Do I think that's like ideal or fair? Not incredibly. I think there are good arguments to be made. I just think you didn't really address what to me seemed like a fairly nuanced thing that was leading me in that direction. So that's kind of where I started with that. My main question in resolving the substance is whether I think, you know, a sharing economy, revolutionary innovation can put capitalism on a new direction from what I think is kind of its like exploitive, potentially imperialist prime directive. I don't think it does for a number of reasons. My presumption is that capitalism is geared to profit off the global north at the expense of the periphery. I think their Hickle card, Coldry are both very good on that. This finger card, I think, is fairly good in the context even of alleged changes to socialism. They're like, that is great for the global north, but it still results in resource extraction and exploitation and labor in various other areas that ultimately might not be sustainable. I think you can certainly get over that hump, but I don't think you do. Tyfield, which is kind of your signature card, is awfully well phrased, but my issue with it is I think it's super aspirational. It's like, here's what has to happen for something to get done. And I'm just like not confident that those pieces get there. This might be a particular thing for me as a judge, but when I don't get the like, here's what the change the AF makes does that leads to all of this stuff this Ev is talking about, when the Ev doesn't make that connection itself, I'm like, it's very hard for me to give like full credence to the complete idealist vision that Tyfield gets you. I think your Allen card gets you some way there. It certainly says that it unlocks disruptive innovation. I have no idea if it unlocks innovation that's necessary to put us on like a genuinely sustainable path that leads like extractive fossil fuel economies to be totally fine from an environmental perspective, which is essentially, I think, the threshold you need to win your link turn. Your rejoinder in the 1A or 2AR is it's inevitable. This is the only way to go. I think the 2NR begins on the K and says that logic is fairly unpersuasive and just leads us back to status quo thinking, which I don't think is ideal. And I clearly don't think it is inevitable in the sense that everyone's authors thinks that there's at least some paths for us to be able to get on a better track. And it's just like, exactly how does this happen? They have some stuff that says, hey, all of these renewable, potentially disruptive, innovative stuff you point to might not work. King has a number of examples, and there's the other card that's after King that says like it's theoretically possible to put extractive economies back on the path. But I'm just like, it's like extremely nebulous to me how exactly that's going to happen. Whereas I think the neg offense of just like capitalism equals imperialism equals extraction equals violence is frankly super clear. A few other things, I think so for me, the transition wars federalism stuff mattered a lot less because I basically don't think alt solvency matters hugely much. And And then I think I agreed with Gabe. Solvency just like didn't really do it for me. I didn't think the exemption stuff was definitive. I thought the evidence was like suspiciously old, and I thought their like fiat plan text stuff was convincing. I think as written, the plan probably solves. And if I choose between a version of it that loses on presumption and a version that doesn't, I'm obviously going to choose reasonably the version that doesn't. A few tips for both sides. I think like finding a piece of signature offense is really important. I think neg, like what exactly is the main thing that outweighs the climate link turn? Aff, I think you need to like triple down on like what is the impact we're beating the K with. I think part of the issue for me is like it's all some combination of all of them at once, and it needs to be like coalesced into here's our thing, here's why it wins. We're going to like totally defend it from any attack with like overwhelming evidence that totally beats back their stuff. And I think that's achievable, but it didn't really get there for me. And yeah, that's what I
got. Congrats everyone for making it to the NDT. Good job. Exciting here. Okay, so I also voted negative. I started with the solvency question, and I think Gabe did an even better job than I can on that, but it really came down to me thinking that the Aff argument that the plan fiats out some of these legal questions really lined up with what the evidence was talking about. But I wanted to mention this because I really thought this was, I really admired this debating as it was happening in the moment and really enjoyed it. And it got to some of the interesting legal questions. And so I appreciated it in that respect. But definitely the app just like, it's like kind of just gone immediately almost, I thought. Okay, so the critique, I voted on the framework argument about sort of like what we are as judges and this like a priori question of investigating the app as this object that informs our sort of discussions and stuff. I think Ezra had really great phrasing with the alt solvency not determinate in the other direction, which I thought was very accurate in what the affirmative team is trying to battle throughout this. And what makes it quite slippery is that the app is sort of overly focused on this post question, and the negative is doing a great job of identifying the cult of inevitability. I thought the evidence that you're extending on the food impact war, you know what I'm talking about? I thought that there was a piece of evidence there that was quite good at doing this, that's like talking about motivating the logic of intervention and stuff. And so that was like a great moment that was indicative or specific application of your theorizing that I quite enjoyed. I think the affirmative team is not going to that next extra level, and also does not have a defense of some of the arguments that they're making in a world that's paired with very author-heavy warrant explanation by the affirmative team. So what I mean by this is like from the beginning, Aff, I thought one thing that could have been better with some of your cross-examination, and this may just be me, I haven't judged as many debates as I have in previous years on this topic, but I really felt that there were a lot of moments where the questions that the negative team was asking were answered almost only by reference to author names, instead of explaining broadly what this sort of practice would look like, right? And so this idea of like this utopian vision that the negative is constantly characterizing the Aff as becomes all the more persuasive because I'm lacking the language to articulate what it is that the affirmative does and what it means for this sort of like specialized economy and stuff like that. And so that's kind of what I would add in terms of the Aff for improvement there. But overall, I think that there's like just like a very clear link on this like imperialism variation of the cap argument. And I'm also incredibly suspicious of the Aff solvency and lack the language to articulate what this alternative that resolves the cap impacts are and what they would be. Great debating though. I really, really quite enjoyed judging this round.
How does the permutation factor into your decisions at all, or like what it doesn't matter?
For me, the permutation, they have something they say in the 2NR where they extend the link based on a scholarship and sort of like what you've already said phrasing, I believe. And that's where, sorry, I'm trying to find the spot on my flow, but oh yeah, it still begs this question of unethicality regarding your scholarship. And so this other permutation that you're advancing doesn't make sense to me. I'm referencing the one that Gabe was talking about specifically.
Yeah.
I'll just weigh in on that. I only thought it was relevant insofar as you wanted to win this like tech link term, like the tech inclusion, tech union people inclusion screws up the alt thing. That to me was like sort of irrelevant, and I thought their response to it was good. And they were just like, the alt is about the global south. It is just not about the tech workers in Silicon Valley being part of the global international. So I thought the like difference between, insofar as that term was different from the other one that you seem to not want to go for, I was just like, it seems to be really the same thing. I don't think that's getting you like any net extra offense.
Okay. To ask kind of just like what impact calc meant in this debate, like I'm trying to better conceptualize what it would mean to weigh, like in the 2AR, I'm kind of trying to like set up a frame where it's like we should be able to weigh the implications of the app. My question is like, did you think that the representations links outweighed like the app's advantages, or that like they just sequenced and like it was a rhetoric thing and our rhetoric didn't access any of the case impacts? Or like, I'm just trying to figure out like, how did you assess the risk of the app within their framework?
So I at least assessed it, I think the way one like normally would in a CapK debate, where it's like, unless you like evaluate the impact to the link to the extent there is one against the impact to the app. And you can like attempt to use a permutation to mitigate that. You can use impact defense to mitigate that, etc. But that's basically how I did it. Just like, the way one might a DA. The thing I thought was an issue here was like a solvency combined with kind of like alt turns case problem that was like, I don't think you access enough of climate to outweigh this, structural imperialist violence DA.
And I'm sorry, could you just contextualize what you meant by alt turns case?
So in terms of like K-turns case, this is all the like, you just reinvest innovative energy back into profit seeking. Okay. You don't actually develop the right technology, that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Maggie, did you feel similarly about?
There was a slightly different frame that I understood, which was this sort of sequencing question, which informed the implementation or my assessment of the validity of your claims about your advantages, especially for the food stuff, right? So like, I don't think there's ever an answer to this question about imperial intervention, which means like you've got this like impact calculus about it, but I'm skeptical as to, I don't know if there's not an answer to like, this is fear mongering kind of garbage. And so like, at its core, right? Like that's not what it's saying. They don't say that, use those terms explicitly, but like that's what the evidence is saying. And they're extending this throughout the debate. And I didn't really think there was an answer to this. So I guess that is kind of like a rhetoric-y type argument. But then the other argument is just sort of like, they've won this sort of top level about imperialist violence, which makes your impacts inevitable. And then I think they're doing a great job on answering the like, doing a better job of the solvency debating or applied solvency on the incumbent's advantage for the impacts there.
So solvency as in like the corporation, like corporate control of like data and things takes out solvency, the same things like Ezra was describing?
Yes, but also the imperialism variant on that.
Makes like the climate stuff to the incumbent's advantage inevitable, you're saying? Or I was just wondering like what you were saying that it was taking out.
The arguments about so on the incumbent's advantage, the stuff about like renewables and stuff, those examples, all of that was sort of like proof of their arguments about imperialism and how the advantage would be implemented or like should be understood and such.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to ask about, I think, is just like kind of how I should better, obviously like need to win framework to some greater degree. It seems pretty difficult to win offense under the current framework. I mean, Ezra hinted at a fairness argument, but do you like, what do you think is the optimal response to the type of framework that they've posited? Because in my view, it was mostly like trying to reach a middle ground, plus like insofar as they just like distract from us being able to wear advantages bad for like analysis, subjectivity building, all that good stuff. But like, do you think that's a bad approach? Like how do you think I could better contextualize or build new offense against this inter?
So for me, what needs to happen is the focus can't just be like, let's just make sure we get to weigh the F. Because I think they kind of start there, which is what was a little bit weird about this. They're just like, oh, sure, you get to do that, apparently. And what I think needs to happen is you probably want to read a card that says, like, not defending the result of your political philosophy is suspect, bad theorizing, bad scholarship, bad research. And so it's like you don't solve or you don't meet your own framework argument. Your attempt to kind of like weasel out of defending what a workers' international thing is and kind of this anemic explanation of what worker strikes does for you is like a demerit against your own research strategy. And so you should prefer our like much more politically grounded thing instead.
Yeah, my thoughts was that like I thought that our like Mason and Watts evidence helped us establish that claim. Do you think that evidence like is like has problems with it, or that there's like other things that we need to be getting to answer this? Because like I thought that there were at least I kind of tried to say that like all the alt presses we're making kind of like demonstrate that there's important feasibility questions to answer, like kind of like a question begging thing. But I didn't know if you thought that was just like a non-starter or like what you thought about that.
So that I just understood that as alt debating when you did it. I did not understand that as like, this is why their framework argument is bad, or this is why you like have to force them to defend the thing. I was just my flowing of Watts in the two error was like it, vagueness is proves their politics would fail, which is like, sure, I agree with you. And I was like, what does that imply about this like prior research question? Why do we have to force them to defend that? And I think you need to just turn that into explicit framework offense.
Okay. And did you think that did you think our Watts evidence, like I'm just trying to figure out like if we just like don't have a card that's like good enough to attempt to answer that question. I thought the 2AC Watts evidence was like close enough that it like makes a contingency argument, kind of argues that it's important to talk about things like the advantages. And I tried to like embed that into our clash stuff. That's the reason I went for clashes, because I thought it was supported by the Watts evidence. But do you think it'd be better to go for like a fairness push or something?
Yeah, so I think that that card is good about why like you should be able to weigh your stuff and why we need to talk about it. But I think you need probably something slightly different for why is it bad for them to like avoid things. I think that's like slightly different. I do think this totally gets you like weigh the F. That was not the problem. But yeah, I think you probably need something else that's like trying to like weasel and be weird is bad.
Okay, for sure. Did you have thoughts on, because I kind of agreed that like we needed something to like prove that they had that, and I had thought that the Mason card at the bottom of the incumbent's advantage was like the second one that I was trying to cite. Do you think that card makes an argument that is persuasive in that realm, or do you think that I need to have something else throughout this debate? Because I was trying to like lean into Mason as a justification for why they need to be held accountable for like some of the things they're listing in there. That was like the main argument that I tried to go for.
So this again is like, this card I don't think really is a framework level card. I think this is when we're thinking about the merits of sharing economy versus just like wholesale anti-capitalism, we should be suspect of the latter, not that like the argumentative move to try to not defend something is is bad. So I think it needs to be like up a level of generality, not like about your specific thing. I think this is a fantastic card for just like sharing economy could work, but not great for what does it mean when neg attempts to not defend its alternative.
Okay. Yeah, that answers all of the questions I have.
No, that was
You're
mine.
good. Yep. Thank you very much.
Cool. Great debate at MSU. I have three main questions, and I'll try to be kind of quick, even though I think we lost Maggie. So first, about this alt. So I kind of realized we were not doing great on the alt debating, and that's why I pivoted a little bit more to framework. And like, we don't need to defend the alt. Do you all think it could be viable to win that this, like, if the app debates it really well, do you all think it's worth just trying to debate them on like, yes, this actually can immediately overthrow global capitalism? Or do you think framework is generally the better move rather than trying to like actually win this alt solves?
I personally thought this framework card that you read is really interesting and like had a lot to unpack. And that's all I have to say there. But I don't know.
I mean, I think you can get me on the alt maybe if you just read a card that's good on like quick supply chain disruptions would actually stop capitalism. Like not interrupt, not disrupt, like stop, break. The system is gone. We would not be able to restart. And I think there are cards that kind of even quantify that are like 11 days without stable supply chains would like break all of these different industries. Like a card like that, I think could help. And then you can make the choice in the 2NR after they've answered it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree with Gabe.
Cool, thank you. My second question was kind of, so the way we go for this K a lot relies on a lot of like case links that are a little bit, that are kind of connected to the theory of the K, but a little bit disconnected. Do you all have advice on like how to consolidate the 2NR better when we kind of have like floating links on case and I feel like we're kind of doing well on them? Do you think I should pick one? Do you think I should focus more on the K as our main impact, or just like general thoughts about how to like clean that up and not make it seem all over?
One thing I wanted to say earlier is I think you should just read case defense. I think it's like way too overcomplicated to try to have this much offense in this many places. And it opens you up to a significant vulnerability if you don't adequately cover something that they're really pushing on. And so I think that's a lot easier from your perspective. You can just have kind of like quick impact defense extensions or something, and you're not leaving them with potentially open-ended offense. And so that I think consolidates it. And like on the K itself, you can have your maybe signature 1 to 2, like, you know, K turns case or like super app specific links. But yeah, for me, I think the model would be to have just like case defense instead.
I agree. I was thinking like throughout the 1 and C that these arguments could have been in the 2 and C on some of the case arguments a little bit. And then like you just needed better, more thorough. I was like uncomfortable with some of the 1 and C coverage, like as it was going, especially just like, oof, you know, not uncomfortable, but like stressed.
I think case D good. You should say more about the case. And then just say what the implication of each of the things on the case is, like in very clear terms. Like winning this reps thing is sufficient to prove the 1AC as an object of research should not have been introduced. Or like winning this K, like cap root cause thing means they do not solve the nuclear impact that the 2AR will go for. But like very clear language as to what the purpose of winning that is. Because I thought you won some of it, but like for me, weighing stuff under your framework does require me to answer the questions like, is global imperialism or quick nuke war like worse? And I had a hard time like weighing. I didn't really know how you wanted me to do that. And so just explicitly being like, this is what this link means. This is what this one means, I think would help and maybe satisfy like, what does it mean to weigh shit under your framework?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Last question, and this is like a little bit more specific to Gabe, but I would appreciate any answers, is the sustainability warming debating. So we kind of said like renewables fail and like the tech won't be implemented as like our main arguments in this debate. And I know you've judged me in a past debate where you like didn't really vibe with like the way we were debating the capped and self-warming stuff. Do you have advice on just is it, I guess, like, what arguments do you specifically think that we're missing to like be more ahead on like cap can't solve warming, we solve it better? I know you mentioned the explaining why the alt solved it, and that definitely is true, but I guess more on explaining like why cap can't solve warming.
I think it's good to read the cards that are like renewables bad for our imperialism reasons, but there are also cards that just quantify renewables. They're like, there's just like literally not enough to sustain the amount of energy that we would need in an economy that continues to grow under capitalism with purely renewables. So just some of those like modeling cards are like renewables literally not enough to continue growing, that are like similar to DDEV, I think would help. And then I think being a little stronger on all of this shit, if implemented under capitalism, makes things like Jevons paradox more likely to occur. And like political feasibility is more important than the theoretical capability of the technology. Things like that would be useful for me. And then just like on the back end, attach some, here's how the alt solves. And then some like, here's why, even if that does mean we stop growing and like collapse occurs in some places and there's a risk of some of the transition offense, that it is net more likely to avoid extinction from climate than investing in tech.
Yeah. Okay, cool. That answers all my questions. Thank you all so much for judging. Super helpful comments.
Yep. Thank you.
Great debate, MSU. Always.
Bye-bye.
Good luck to you. Good luck tomorrow, y'all. Thanks, judges.
Yeah.